It's now time for our devotional thought brought to us by our friends at Voice of Prophecy.
Do you believe that prayer makes a difference? A real tangible difference in your day-to-day life? Well, I believe that it does, and I've experienced it on multiple occasions. Praying specifically for and about the things going on in our lives gives us peace and comfort. A few months ago, my oldest daughter, Natalie, called me. She and her husband were wrestling with a ministry call about whether the position would be offered to them, and if it would be, if they would accept it. I prayed for her and specifically about that situation. We talked some more, and she asked me about a situation I was struggling with. And then she prayed for me and the specifics of that. It was a special experience. Prayer is something that's a part of Natalie's life. She told me that the day before our call, she and one of her closest friends visited the venue where Natalie was married. They relived some special memories from that day. And then these two young women stood together right at the spot where Natalie and Devin had committed their lives to each other. And they prayed. They prayed about the call specifically and about Natalie and Devin's future. Women of faith united in prayer. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? Well, praying specifically about what's going on in our lives is biblical. God wants to hear from us about the big decisions that we're wrestling with and the heartaches that we perhaps can't share with anyone else. We see this model of specific prayer in the life of David. Now, when David was just 30 years old, he became king over all Israel. It was a long, dangerous, and complicated journey to kingship. David's predecessor, Saul, fell out of favor with God. You see, Saul chose his own way, and he didn't seek God in important decisions. He failed to be the spiritual leader of the nation that God intended him to be. And so God chose a shepherd boy, David, to replace Saul. Now Saul became defensive, angry, and he sought to kill David. When Saul died, not everyone's allegiances swung behind David right away. He was king over Judah first, and only after 7 years was he king over all of Israel. Now, with a new king at the helm, the Israelites' enemies, the Philistines, they planned an attack. They set out in search of the new king. David retreated to a stronghold, and there, before making any further plans, David prayed. He asked God what he should do. Specifically, he asked, "Should I go out and fight the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand?" Well, God heard this prayer, and he answered David, "Yes, go out. I'll help you." And David listened, and he was victorious. Now, while David and his men were still celebrating their victory, the Philistines gathered for another attack. They spread out in the valley around them. How frustrating that must have been for the new king. His life and position threatened not once, but twice. Well, again, David prayed before making a move. Let's read it in the book of 2 Samuel. We can find it in chapter 5. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, "You shall not go up. Go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." And David did as the Lord commanded him. What really strikes me about this account is the level of detail that goes into both the prayer and God's answer. God tells David exactly how to position his troops, and he gives him a sign of when to know that it was safe to attack. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees. I can picture in my mind David and his men waiting patiently, their eyes and ears lifted up to the tops of the trees. Silently they wait. And then they hear it, the sounds of marching breeze through the tops of the balsams with the wind. And how did they respond? Well, the verse that we just read ended with the key for his success as a king, and the key to finding peace and contentment in our lives. And it's this: David did as the Lord commanded. You know, David had a transparent and a close relationship with God. He talked to him as he made decisions and processed challenges in his leadership role and in his family. And God guided him, and vitally important for David, he listened. David kept his eyes and ears in tune with what God said would happen next. He listened for subtle signals. He watched for what God told him to watch for. And things always turned out just as God assured David that they would. You know, David was different from Saul in many ways, but it was this relationship with God, this open dialogue and willingness to follow his guidance, that was the biggest difference. It was the difference in their ability to lead Israel effectively. You know, I like the language and the imagery of this answered prayer. God told David to keep his eyes and ears on the tops of the balsam trees. There they would hear his signal to move. You know, God wants to answer my prayers just as specifically as he did David's. He knows what's next for me. He knew whether Natalie and Devin would receive that ministry call and whether or not they should accept it. You know, our answers to prayer may not be as specific as to tell us to listen to the treetops, but God does give us signs to watch for. And so, watch for signs for his answered prayers. Watch and listen for the swaying balsam trees. And when you see the signs, trust God and follow his lead. He will never lead you astray.